Hi, my name is Lee Richardson, and this is my capstone presentation entitled The Connection Between Film Noir and the Westerns of the Early 1950s. Last, spring semester, I took a cinema studies course on film noir, and as I was doing research of the projects, I discovered that a lot of the filmmakers who did film noir in the 40s and early 50s also did some very good westerns that I happen to love. So, in this presentation, I will look at the relationship between the film noir movement of the 1940s and 1950s and the western by examining some of the works of filmmakers Fritz Lang, Nicholas Ray, and Anthony Mann, showing how their experiences as noir directors contributed to the increased maturity of the western as a film genre in the early 1950s. So, the first category I've entitled The Vengeful Male. So one of the common themes of both film noir and the western is revenge. In the film noir, usually, the revenge is being sought by somebody who was framed for a crime, thrown in jail, and then when he's released, he decides to go after, the person, who, put him there. The western is a little bit different. William Indyk writes, "The hero's vengeance was always honorable. He was wronged egregiously, typically through the murder of his wife, fiancé, father, or brother. The killers, escaping justice, must now face individual justice at the hands of the hero. The hero's justice is an honorable act, a just one, and not only fulfills the hero's personal need for satisfaction, but also performs a task of social value." This gets a little more complicated in the 1950s, though, because of the appearance of what's known as the psychological western, which also examines the Western hero's inner struggles. So the first director I'm looking at is Fritz Lang. Now, Paul Schrader, in his article Notes on Film Noir, states that there are four factors that led to the film noir movement: war and post-war disillusionment, post-war realism, the German influence, and the hard-boiled tradition. Fritz Lang seems to fit all of these. He was born in Austria, but he made his films in Germany. He was severely wounded during World War I, and also suffered from PTSD. And he was also part of the German Expressionist movement. Expressionism is very difficult to define, but it's one of those things that you know it when you see it. Ephraim Katz in the film Encyclopedia states that it's characterized by extreme stylization of sets and decor, as well as in acting, lighting, and camera angles. All of these things which were used in film noir. Okay, Lang also made a film in 1931 called M, which is about a mentally ill child murderer who is pursued by both the police and the Berlin underworld, and that really foreshadowed the film noir movement by about 10 years. In 1933, Joseph Goebbels asked him to head the German Cinema Institute. Lang said he would, think about it, and then he basically just immediately fled the country, first to, Paris and then to the United States, where he managed to, work within the Hollywood studio system for 20 years. His career eventually faded in the 50s because of, how hard he was to work with and the losing of money in the film industry due to, the television influence. So the first movie I'm looking at is Rancho Notorious. It stars Arthur Kennedy's Vern Haskell. He's a man who's out for revenge after his fiancée is violated and killed. He eventually learns, that, the killer is at a place called Chuckaluck. It's a ranch, run by a lady named Alter Keene, who hides outlaws, there for 10% of their loot. Anyway, in order to get there, Haskell, pretends to be an outlaw. He gets himself arrested, and where he meets, in jail, Frenchie Fairmont, who acts as one of Alter's allies. Anyway, he helps Fairmont escape from jail, and then they make their way to Chuckaluck, where, after seeing a brooch that Alter is wearing, realizes that the killer is currently there. And the only way he can learn the identity of the person who gave Alter that brooch is to get close to her, maybe even romantically. So, Florian Wilde writes, Rancho Notorious might initially seem to fit the mold of the vengeance variation of the classical Western. In this variant, a hero leaves society because of his superior moral and physical strength, which contrasts with the pusillanimity, incompetence, or irresolution of the townspeople and the law. In the case of Rancho Notorious, it is their unwillingness to hunt down and extirpate the villains. But any notion of Vern Haskell's superior moral qualities is quickly undercut, as the hero, hell-bent on destroying the quarry, becomes the extravagant twin of the killer he is seeking. So yes, basically, a hero in a 1950s vengeance quest western isn't necessarily heroic. He creates a disturbance. Vern creates a disturbance to get himself thrown into jail, and then he helps Frenchie escape. And then later in the film, he goes along with a bank robbery to keep from blowing his cover. Yes, and his behavior to Alter isn't always honorable either. Persuading her to fall in love with him so he can learn the identity of the person who gave her the brooch. So my next film is actually a noir made after Rancho Notorious. In all the other cases in this presentation, the noirs come first. This one, however, is very closely related to Rancho Notorious. It's called The Big Heat from 1953. After a crooked police officer commits suicide, Sergeant Dave Banyan, played by Glenn Ford, is looking into the murder and he speaks to Lucy Chapman, who happens to be the police officer's, mistress, and she tells him there's more to the suicide than he's expecting. Banyan dismisses it, however, Lucy, the young woman, is found dead after being tortured. So, Banyan, feeling a little bit guilty for this, keeps on investigating Lucy's murder, even though he's been told, he needs to lay off. When he doesn't stop, Banyan's wife is killed in an automobile explosion meant for him. Banyan then turns in his badge and goes on a vendetta against Mike Lagana, the local crime boss, and Lagana's, sadistic, second-hand man, Vince Stone. At the same time, Stone's girlfriend, Debbie Marsh, becomes attracted to Banyan and sets out to help him, which only makes things, much more complicated. So, William Endick writes, in the psychological western, the hero-villain duality is blurred as each character is made more complex and more real. In the process, each character becomes less polarized, and both the hero and the villain appear to suffer from the same conflicts. Yeah, even though this is meant for the western, I think it also applies to The Big Heat, because Banyan becomes, becomes less heroic as he takes the law into his own hands. He comes very close to killing, Larry Gordon, the man who placed the explosives in his car. But even though he stops himself from killing him, he does not stop himself from letting the villains know that Gordon has talked and he knows who's behind everything. Also, Banyan comes very close to strangling Bertha Duncan, the wife of the suicidal police officer. He's only stopped because the police suddenly arrive. So, if you watch both of, Rancho Notorious and The Big Heat all the way through, you see that vengeance definitely comes with a cost. Alter, at the end of Rancho Notorious, gets caught in the crossfire and is shot and killed while trying to save Frenchie. And Banyan's persistence in investigating Duncan's suicide actually leads to the death of 4 characters: Lucy Chapman, Katie Banyan, Bertha Duncan, who's killed by Debbie Marsh, in order to help Banyan, and then Debbie Marsh herself, who suffers quite a bit during the movie. At one point, scalding hot water is, thrown on her face, disfiguring her, and by Stone, and towards the end of the film, she's actually shot and killed by Stone. All these deaths seem very extreme. However, in the 1950s, movies were still under the Hollywood Production Code, which stated that no crime committed could go unpunished. So all of these people, since all of them are connected to a crime of one sort or another, have to die. Grant Tracy writes, perhaps within the film's twisted ideology, the sacrifice of women, who gave their blood, is justified in order to eliminate male fears and to restore patriarchal dominance. I think this, fits in with the appearance of the femme fatale in the film noir. The femme fatale, she reflects, the fears that the returning GIs had when they came home from World War II. It was a totally different world. While they were gone, many of the women went to work and found out that they, kind of liked going to work, making money of their own and being able to make their own decisions. And so I think, a lot of the men that came home, started to become afraid of like the power that, women suddenly were having over them. So my next section I've entitled Breaking Free from the Femme Fatale Stereotype. You know, and I'm looking basically at two different types of women who appeared in the film noir, according to Janie Place in her article, Women in Film Noir. The first is the Spider Woman. The Spider Woman. Place writes, independence is her goal, but her nature is fundamentally and irredeemably sexual in film noir. The insistence on combining the two, aggressiveness and sensuality, and a consequently dangerous woman, is the central obsession of film noir, and the visual movement which indicates unacceptable activity in film noir women represents the man's own sexuality, which must be repressed and controlled if it does not destroy him. So in a typical film noir, a man who, might seem to be a very strong man otherwise, is seduced by a woman with, with an agenda, somebody who wants something more than just to be in a relationship. Anyway, this man, is convinced to kill for this woman, and by the end of the film, because of the production code and everybody who commits a crime has to be punished, the femme fatale and her victim actually are both killed by the end of the movie. Good examples I would, point out are Phyllis Dietrichson in Double Indemnity and Katie Moffat in Out of the Past. In westerns, the femme fatale is usually seen as somebody who works in the saloon. She's usually a singer or a prostitute, or perhaps even the owner of the saloon. She could also be seen as somebody who has strong connections to a powerful ranch, either the ranch owner's wife, the ranch owner's daughter, or the owner of the ranch herself, such as the case of Alter in Rancho Notorious. I don't feel that she falls into this category, because I feel Alter is innocent of everything that's going on. I mean, despite the other crimes she's committed. However, I also think that maybe she could have easily acted as a Spider Woman in the past to get what she wanted. So the other category of women in the film noir, according to Place, is the nurturing woman. And Place writes, she gives love, understanding, or at least forgiveness, asks very little in return, just that he come back to her, and is generally visually passive and static. Okay, the nurturing woman usually is not nearly as interesting as the Spider Woman in a film noir. She doesn't get as much screen time, and she's just there to provide a contrast to the femme fatale. She's like somebody the protagonist left behind or can't obtain because of his previous actions. And there are good examples of this in both Out of the Past and Double Indemnity as well. I would include Beth Forbes from Rancho Notorious and Katie Banyan from Big Heat in this category. So my next person I'm looking at is Nicholas Ray. He's most famous for his 1955 film Rebel Without a Cause, starring James Dean. But he made a lot of other good films as well, including his very first film noir, They Live by Night, in 1947. Like Fritz Lang, he eventually fell out of favor in Hollywood, but it was due to his dependence on drugs and alcohol. In 1980, shortly before his death, he was the subject of a documentary by Wim Wenders called Lightning Over Water, which, is all about, Ray's last attempt to make a movie while dying of cancer. So the movie I'm going to look at next is called In a Lonely Place. It's about Dixon Steele, played by Humphrey Bogart, who is a Hollywood screenwriter who is getting basically a second chance. He's been offered a chance to adapt a movie based on a really trashy novel that's out at the time. Anyway, he takes the Hatchet girl home to read the novel, to describe the novel to him so he doesn't have to read it. He gets bored with it, sends her on her way, and gives her cab fare. Next morning, he wakes up. There's a police detective at his door, actually a former army friend of his, who tells him that the girl was murdered and he's wanted for questioning. At police headquarters, his neighbor Laurel Gray, provides him an alibi saying that she saw him. And so Dix is set free. Immediately they fall into a romantic relationship. However, the more she learns about his very violent temper, and begins to witness it for herself, she starts to question his innocence and fear for her life. could he possibly have actually done the killing?